Welcome to HorrorBabble. Today, ladies and gents, we'll be treating you to yet another tale by the ever-elusive Mr. M.D. Vickers. If you're unfamiliar with his previous HorrorBabble offerings, be sure to check out the video description below for a link to the M.D. Vickers playlist. Today's story tells of an atypical Friday night out in the northwest of England. And, interestingly, my brother, Gary, a friend of Mr. Vickers, has the misfortune of appearing in this story. As always, I hope you enjoy this one. The Beast by M.D. Vickers. It was a Friday night. Rain was beginning to make its presence felt in the air, a subtle drizzle that clung to your face like dew. Adam Parker was with his mate, Josh Smith. They were frequenting their usual succession of public houses in the exact same order they always did. The time was just after 9 o'clock, and they were already 4 pints in. As the rain continued its sticky, swirling eddy, Josh Smith made a comment. "Fucking rain, jacket's gonna be ruined." Adam Parker failed to respond. He just continued his hurried trek towards the grey mare. He automatically lifted the collars on his own coat and squinted into the liquefied curtain ahead of him. Charlie's chippy was open for business. There was a light on behind his steamed-up window and the hint of a murky presence beyond the mist. They both entered the mare. Josh Smith ran a hand through his sodden hair before briefly inspecting his leather jacket. Adam Parker hadn't enough hair to run a hand through. Service was more or less immediate. The barmaid was somewhat easy on the eye, yet gave the impression of being somewhat intellectually vacant. She placed the 2 requested pints of lager down on the porous brass plate and voiced the price from around a huge wad of gum. It was Parker's round. He handed over a creased 10 bill. The barmaid grasped it with immaculately manicured nails and approached the till. He received his change, pocketing it without so much as a cursory glance, and swiveled round to survey the scene, removing the layer of foam off his pint as he did so. Josh Smith was engaged in chat. The person in question was unknown to Parker. He nodded his head when he glanced his way to break the proverbial ice. The bloke nodded back and resumed his inebriated talk. The pub itself was busy, a good atmosphere. Parker weaved his way towards the cigarette machine after a brief explanation to Smith. It was quite a challenge to do so without wasting lager. He apologized to random people as he bumped them with his elbow and uttered the odd "all right" to those who he recognized. A woman walked out of the ladies as he wrestled with his change. To Parker, she was stunning. Her hair was fashioned into a short bob style. Her features were amazing. She was attired in a low-cut top and short skirt. Her legs had been slid into a pair of black stockings, and to complete the image, a pair of black stilettos. She glanced at him on her way past and smiled. His heart skipped in his chest. He pivoted round to get a rear view, and was equally as satisfied. Dropping 2-pound coins into the machine, he selected the coffin nails of his choice. "Excuse me, mate." He stepped to the side as the butt of a pool cue nudged his ribs. The character in question he recognized as Steve Holbrook. He was attempting a yellow that looked unpotable to Parker. The shot was missed, albeit by a surprisingly small margin. "Not like you, Steve." "Alright, Park, see how's tricks." Adam Parker slid out a cigarette from the pack and pressed his lips to it. He proffered one to Holbrook, who took it. They both lit up. Conversation lasted perhaps half an hour, although it didn't seem like it. Parker meandered back to the bar. Josh Smith was still there, looking a little more drunk. There was a pint waiting for him on the bar. Smith's glass was empty. "Get him in, Ad." Parker ordered 2 more pints and 2 whiskey chasers. Service this time was via the landlord. His speech was slurred, his eyes the color of rustic brick. The landlord growled the price. It was woefully inaccurate. Parker queried it whilst maintaining a level of control. The landlord furrowed his brow, a brow that looked like it had been subjected to many a furrow in its time. Eventually, the correct change was stubbornly given. Parker handed a pint and shot glass to Smith. Smith nodded his appreciation and resumed his lengthy, in-depth conversation. Parker glanced at his watch. 10:15 p.m. Smith could get the last orders in. He looked around for the vision of his dreams earlier. No sign. Maybe around the other side. The door opened. More people entered, along with a cold blast of air. One of them was Gary Gordon. Parker hadn't seen him in ages. "All right, Flash." Gaz Gordon pivoted his head round, looking momentarily confused, before recognition dawned. Conversation evolved. Time continued to tick away. A bell jangled from behind the bar. Parker revisited his watch. Almost 11 o'clock. Smith got them in, another pint and chaser, this time a double. He had terminated his laborious conversation. They both moved over to the pool table. A game was still in progress. There was a good pile of cash left on the side. Smith rolled a coin into the fruit machine and proceeded to drunkenly punch buttons. Various items of fruit rolled. Banana, cherry bunch, banana. Parker lost interest. He turned away. The dartboard was still being used and abused. He recognized Ian from the cross guns, a pretty good wielder of the tungsten, until the bitter fully kicked in at least. As 11:30 came around, they both drained their double chasers and exited the emptying premises. At least the rain had stopped. Staggering across the road, they entered the steamy, somewhat cramped sauna that was Charlie's. They had a bit of a wait as he was a popular guy, mainly with patrons of the Grey Mare. "2 beef curries, please, Charles," Parker eventually slurred after around 10 minutes or so. 15 minutes later, 2 foil trays were placed on the coin-eroded formica. Money changed hands, civil goodbyes exchanged. They left the suffocating greasy air behind and commenced their habitual trek back through the bunk. They both had no idea why it was called the bonk. It was an area of overgrown woodland that they often used as a cut-through. Josh Smith led the way. The blackness was intense. Silence, aside from the noise created by the pair's drunken ramble. "Shit, curry down my fucking pants. Just felt it." This outburst had come from Parker, startling the hurrying form of Smith somewhat. Something seemed different tonight. There was an inexplicable menace in the air. Smith wondered if Parker felt the same. They plowed on. Sticks cracked and crunched, the sound of clothing hastily brushing damp foliage, frantic chewing as they gorged on their curries. They were approaching the bridge that spanned the little river. Across it they would go, as they usually did. Smith saw it first. Naturally, really, considering he was first. A shape. A shuffling shape on the bridge. A big shape. A shape that began to grunt and snuffle like some form of wild pig. Josh Smith drew up, throwing away the remains of his curry, no longer hungry. Adam Parker collided into his rigid back. "Fuck's sake, Josh. What the—" "Shut the fuck up," Smith returned. Their eyes were now becoming more accustomed to the Stygian darkness. They both peered ahead. What the fuck is that?" Parker whispered. The entity continued to move back and forth across the bridge. Those grunts, horrible deep guttural grunts, totally unlike any normal animal. "It's like that's the troll and we're the fucking goats." Josh Smith stood motionless. "Let's go back. Turn around now. Fucking move." Parker didn't need telling twice. He turned and began to retrace his route. Smith followed suit. The thing began to move towards them. They could hear it behind them, picking up speed. "Fucking run!" Smith whispered breathlessly. Parker broke into a gallop, feeling totally blind. The beast was moving even faster. Its gait sounded strange. "Fucking run, for Jesus, Marys, run!" Parker began to scream as he ran, branches whipping his face. Smith started to shove at his back, wanting to overtake. The visually challenged Parker veered slightly off the route, frantically searching for a shortcut. He hit a tree full on. There was a sickening thud. His head collided with trunk. He fell back, completely bewildered, and the thing grabbed him. Smith plowed on, his feet lifted high off the ground, knees almost to his chin. Over his rushing breath and thudding heart, he could hear the beast, could hear huge thudding whacks, and worst of all, Adam Parker's helpless screams. How much longer he was picked up, he had no idea. He was a gibbering wreck. He lay on the path, twitching and trembling, babbling incoherently. A sensation of being grabbed and shaken. A rough hand slapped his face, bringing with it semi-reason. He was interrogated. All he could do was point towards the ominous black void of the bunk. 3 men went in with flashlights, even though Smith had begged them not to. They had armed themselves with makeshift weaponry. The one in front also had a gun. They followed the path, the only real footpath there was. The flashlights picked out the previously trampled shrubbery ahead of them. They listened, but could hear no noise from within. When they reached the bridge, a flashlight roved the length of it. About 12 feet long was all. Nothing. The flashlight continued to rove. Leading off from the stone bridge were a series of footprints in the soft, churned earth. All 3 walked closer, the beam centered on the ground ahead. All 3 frowned. They squatted down to examine the prints closer. The size of the prints were huge, equating to around a 15 in human size, they estimated. They looked human, except for the fact that the bare footprints seemed to only possess a big toe and 2 smaller ones on each foot. They made their way back, flashlights still swinging across the undergrowth. All 3 felt heavily disturbed by what they'd seen. As they retraversed the route, a strange stillness seemed to hang over the area, a sort of quiet menace. The leader of the threesome suddenly pulled the other 2 up with a start. His flashlight had revealed something in the undergrowth. They all gathered round, whatever it was on the ground. It was a man. His clothing had been completely torn off him. They had missed him on their journey in. The reason they had missed him was because his body blended in with the blackness. The reason it blended in was because the entirety of it was covered in huge, dark bruises. Every inch was hideously contused, as if he had been subjected to a massive beating. The eyes were wide open, the horror trapped there, obvious even in death. And from far away, yet at the same time not feeling all that far away at all, something grunted. The stillness then resumed, once more. Thank you for listening today. If you'd like to support our work here at HorrorBabble, be sure to check out the video description below, where you'll find links to our Bandcamp and Patreon pages, our merch store over at Teespring, and further information relating to our releases on Audible, iTunes, and Spotify. And until next time,